Welcome to 2025 and our first MSP Confidential of the year. My name is Luis Giraldo, host of MSP Confidential, brought to you by SkillPad. And today I welcome the very talented and good friend of mine, Brian Miller. I've got my notepad here. Class is in session. Dude, welcome to the live stream for the first time. I've been trying to get you for a whole year. Happy New Year. How have you been?
Absolutely. Thanks for the invite. Certainly thrilled to be here. And yeah, 2025 certainly starting off for a bang for us as well. So things have been very, very busy in our world across the board, both MSP specific and just general life. December holidays, everybody's sort of like trying to cram stuff in end of the year, and then you're all right into January, and it's sort of like you got to start all over again. So brand new deal. So
Fair enough.
been super
Well,
busy.
I've got a good friend, Todd Kane, who says saying that you're busy is a crutch. And so let's unpack that a little bit.
Sure.
Maybe a year ago, you were a much smaller company than you are going into 2025. And so I figure that's where some of this idea of busy is coming from. There's a lot going on. You're maybe rethinking a bit of how you go into the annual planning process as a bigger company. What's been the sort of the evolution of the business in the last year?
Yeah, that's a fair sort of way to call it out. So I appreciate the call out on that. So to start with, just take a step back about FusionTek, right? Like we were formed 17 years ago, built the business up, and it's one of these things we sort of slowly bumped up a little bit at a time, and we've really hit more of that like hockey stick type of inflection as of late. So over the past 18-ish months, we've completed three M&A activities. We've got a couple more which are in the pipeline at the moment in various stages. We've got about 85 plus people on the team, so people in every time zone domestically in the US. And then we've got a bunch of folks who are on the team internationally as well. So we've really been able to level up our capacity and knowledge. And we've just over the past year added a bunch of like really high level like A players to help lead various parts of the organization. So all those things going on, I really view at this point what my responsibility is and what the rest of the leadership team's responsibility is. How are we setting those folks up for success?
Yep.
So not the edict of just showing up and being like, you will do X, but it's like, how do we as servant leaders really talk about like, how do we empower you? How do we support you? How do we help you grow? So that's really the biggest thing that's top of mind for me at the moment.
So, we often talk about maybe inflection points in MSPs, the growth curve and the certain maybe pieces where like, oh, going from X number to X number seems to be a really tough a grind. And so at 85, and some of your growth has been through M&A, of course, but where have you recently had some of those maybe inflection points of growth? Where you're like, oh, it's nice to have gotten over that hump type of
Uh,
thing. And what were some of the challenges leading up to it?
Well, absolutely. So it's probably a lot of people who start an MSP and bootstrap it from the ground up. You're like the guy doing everything, period. And so when I first started, I was the guy like pulling cable under desks. And then like at 2 a.m. in the morning, I'd be like, oh, I got to like send some invoices. And then I got to like figure out how to order stuff from distribution. And then I got to go try and get a new client because the old client left. And we're just spinning all these different plates, right? So you got all these things going on. And really, what the biggest thing we've seen is as we've grown, one of the most awesome opportunities, I would say, for both existing team members and new people who join us is what used to be if we take the accounting function, for instance, just sending out invoices. Well, used to be that was something I jammed into some of my time in doing, then sort of offload some of that to other people. And at this part, we have a controller, we have a couple people on a billing team, we've added capacity in that particular area. And so for folks in that area where that's their professional discipline and their focus, they're able to scale and grow in that space. And we're able to level up what we're doing overall.
Mm.
But I would tell you the key things from an MSP owner perspective, from guys like in the trenches, in the weeds, knows what's going on there. The biggest areas are having functional leaders that you can count on for your various departments. So you've got somebody who's like really that sort of person. A lot of times economics and budget are really tough in the MSP space. And so we've really tried to make a point to invest in our leaders on both compensation, training, support, all the other things to set them up for success so they can really deliver both customer service excellence and technical excellence, which are two of our cornerstones.
Mm.
Some of the inflection points, though, that you're talking about, it's like really having that dedicated person to do back office functions. Having a project manager at this point, we've got a couple project managers, a couple project coordinators, having dedicated folks who are dealing with like procurement and vendor distribution, all that sort of stuff. We actually have somebody on our team at this point who does a lot of back office, like program integrations. They're working on an API today between a couple different programs. And I remember I'd go to peer group meetings for years and I would hear people, oh yeah, I've got this guy who does this program or this, that in the back of my head. I'd be like, dang, like
How
we
do
don't
I
have
get
anybody
that?
like
Yeah.
that. Like, yikes, like we have this gap or whatever here. And so there's a lot of those things now. And so now the thing is just making sure we're being really good, diligent utilization of resources, right? So we don't sort of have sprawl of let's go spend too much time doing X or Y because we really want to make sure we're delivering excellence for our customers.
Hmm. So let me maybe double click on something because I find it's always hilarious to me how business owners, after they've gotten to a certain level, they quickly forget maybe some of the nuanced pain and suffering of the earlier years. And I wanted to ask you specifically about leadership because I think this is an area that maybe for a lot of MSPs, it takes a while to get around to the idea of installing or bringing on middle management or a leadership team. And I'm curious how your thoughts on this have evolved over the years. You know, maybe you thought about it a certain way when you were just hiring your first service desk manager, and now you really have obviously a servant leadership focus on it, and so on. So tell me a little bit about the transition of those things over the years.
Yeah, I will tell you for the longest time, I was the person who would have had to have been dragged kicking and screaming in that category. Because to my point, I was like, we're going to hire somebody, but they can't be a contributor as like a salesperson. They can't be a contributor as a technical resource, something like that, where there's direct client interaction. In my mind, I'm just like, that is super expensive overhead, right? Like that is like, we can't do that. Like we don't have the money for that. And, in the first couple of years, obviously there was like, I was like deferring and not paying myself. So like I was like, I gotta be able to pay and just pay like normal basic sort of stuff and everything.
Hmm.
And so over time we slowly were able to do that. And what we realized was we probably dragged it out too long in not investing in some of that. And that delayed and stunted our growth. And I would tell you there's probably a 5 to 8 year period, if I'm being honest about it, that I was the limiting factor because we didn't want to go spend in those different areas, those different things. Did we do good? Yes. Did a lot of people, have good jobs? Do we deliver great service? Sure. Could we have grown at the rate we're growing now 5 to 8 years ago if I'd got my act together on that? Absolutely.
Yeah, maybe talk to me a bit about the time horizon of that. Like once you decided to make the investment, because I think this is another area where perhaps MSPs get a little antsy that they're not seeing results quickly enough. And this happens also in the sales and marketing side, which we'll get into maybe a little bit. But just even on the
Sure.
people side, it's like, okay, we're going to invest in this person or this role specifically, and then suddenly it's like, oh, 3 months in, it's like nothing's happening. What is your experience with time horizons there?
It's funny you mentioned that because I actually had a call this morning with a couple of folks in our management team, and we were talking specifically about one department working to level up sort of what the expectation is, what the deliverables, what's going on. And it's been a couple months since we made a fairly solid change in that particular department. And we were like, hey, there's some areas where things are going great, and there's some areas where, hey, we're not really having the success we need to. And so my attitude to that is at this point, because we've hired somebody who's like the departmental level manager, who's like that A player type of person, my attitude was here's what I see the challenge as, but I'm here to support your decision on what that is. And your decision can go a couple different ways, but let's have a roadmap, let's have a plan, and let's have a checking cadence to agree to it.
Mm.
And so for me, that's been a really tough but successful, I think, at this point, sort of like learning curve where just because I own the company doesn't mean I get to show up and make like every single decision about everything and change all sorts of stuff. I certainly have a lot of very specific expectations on how things are delivered in some cases. Absolutely not a question. I'm very passionate that if we commit to doing something, we are going to follow through on that particular thing. But that being said, we got some sharp people, and so we want to make sure what can we be doing to support them.
If I know anything about the human condition, Brian, it's that probably this has not been this way always. And so, tell me a bit about your accountability process and how you maybe instill it. And what are some of the mechanisms that you think about to keep yourself in check? Because I think that's the other piece. Like you have to create some guardrails as an owner to give people the latitude to actually make some of the decisions, right? So,
Absolutely. So there's a joke or an adage, which is, what do vegans, CrossFitters, and pilots have in common? And the answer is they're going to tell you about it. So, by the same token, one of the most popular, I think, management philosophies in this industry, which a lot of people talk about, is EOS, or the Entrepreneurial Operating System. And I would tell you that's a prime example of something I heard for like 8, 10 years. And just, I was like, guys, like, shut up. Like, it's another meeting. Somebody's talking about it, whatever. Yeah, 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 whatever. You got like something you're doing. And we really got sort of like to that stagnation point, like I talked about, where we needed to have a framework. And at this point, I'm a really big fan of frameworks, which we can use to accomplish something and get somewhere. And so for us, the EOS framework worked. And there's parts of that we are super diligent about. So if you know the EOS parlance and process, some of the key components are you're going to have sort of your organizational structure a certain way. You're going to have what's called an L10 or level 10 meeting on a weekly basis that has both some accountability or scorecard items for everybody in the meeting, some what are called rocks, which are maybe more quarterly things or goals, to dos that are a little more, shorter time period. And then IDS, identify, discuss, solve, the opportunity to talk through any issues or challenges and make sure we have a roadmap or a plan. And so at this point, we've got the vast majority of the folks in our organization on an L10 meeting of some sort. And certainly the L10 meeting for the leadership team has different items than the L10 meeting for the reactive service technicians. But having that framework across the board was really good for us and really disciplined. So where a lot of times I think that I'm very reactive and, hey, what does the customer need and how do we really deliver excellence for the customer? This forced me to like define a framework and then define some expectations. So, hey, the new employee or somebody else, what does excellence really look like? Well, excellence looks like maybe it's this particular customer survey results, or it's this particular way in which we're going to log time in our PSA system, or it's this other deliverable over here, or being recognized for an industry award. And so those are really the things where we're trying to set more of that framework on how we get there. So we're really clear on it. And that's been an area that I'm continuing to work at, but I think we're making a lot of progress in.
Did you guys work with a facilitator to bring on EOS?
So we went through the EOS circus 3 times, and we are on the third pass. The first 2 times remember how I was telling you how I didn't want to add like management overhead. Well, absolutely, I wasn't going to pay for the EOS facilitator. And what we determined is the first 2 times we spent way more time, like no joke, myself and our CTO who's been on the team for a decade plus, super sharp guy, would just have debates for hours about how we wanted to design SharePoint to track the data. Nothing about the actual data or what we're going to do or the business process.
Yeah,
We're talking about like how it's going to get saved in SharePoint because that was really the critical issue at that point. And for us, when we committed the capital to it, we both have an EOS facilitator, so somebody who meets with us on a quarterly basis. We actually have our quarterly meeting next Friday. And then also helps us, like we have our weekly L10s, we use 90.io. There's a couple different platforms that people use for that sort of thing. But having those things in that structure, once again, was really helpful. And I would tell you, like, I totally get the self-implementation. Like, I want to be as cost-effective as possible, just like the next guy. But that was something that, why do people pay for a trainer at the gym, right? Mostly because they're taking attendance when you show up. Yeah.
And there's something to be said maybe about the the MSP specific human condition of long-term goals and our ability to keep the stamina and execution focus over a long period of time. And EOS kind of seems to fall squarely in that category. It's like, oh, this is not like a 2-month project, right? We got to do all these layers. First of all, you got to do it at the leadership team level. We got to make sure we get it out to the rest of the company. And that's an area that I find super interesting because what was the process of getting this deployed to the rest of your teams? And I feel there's a lot of nuance there. Sometimes it catches people by surprise because it's a lot of change potentially. People sometimes hate change, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But walk me through a bit of the experience, deploying a new operating system for the business across the rest of the team and not just at the inner circles of leadership.
Absolutely. So what I'd start with is saying I had to be a lot more patient than I would expect. And I would also say it's not something that we are done with. And what I mean by that is when we first started the OS process, it was like the little secret thing that the people on leadership team did. And we had some random meeting we didn't tell anybody about or anything else because we were just more or less trying to get our shit together and figure out what was going on. And after we had a lot of muscle memory, I'm talking like in the third sort of implementation, the one with the facilitator and everything else, after we did it for maybe 12 to 18 months, that's probably when we knew we sort of had a cadence and we started talking about a messaging net. And really in probably the 24 to 36 month range is when we started adding some of the higher level teams into it. And I would tell you within the last year or so is when we've really gotten down to everybody who's like an individual contributor or on a sales or a technical basis or all those sorts of things. Yeah. So it's been a very phased approach and we've learned a lot of lessons there. The other thing I would tell you, which has been a really big takeaway for us, is the metrics and things and scorecard items or IDS topics that mattered to us 6 months ago or 12 months ago, a lot of times aren't applicable anymore. And they might not be applicable because of technology. They might not be applicable because the changes in your business, growth, shrinkage, profit, things of that nature, right? But there's all those different components. And so one of the things that we've been working really hard at, and we'll be talking about next week, is what are the metrics or the things we need to true up to like move us forward, right? Because there's metrics currently that we're killing and we're doing great. There's metrics we've set that we're failing to deliver on. And there's metrics where we look at them and everybody's sort of at this point like, yeah, that's why are we even talking about that? That's not an actual factual metric of any sort. It's just more of a conceptual thing here. So, and I just really want to stress is that I am an expert at making mistakes across the board, to put it mildly. And so my goal in this sort of stuff is, hey, I've recognized at this point, hey, we're going to make a lot of mistakes, but as long as we're getting some forward progress in there, that's the important part.
Yeah. That comes with that newly acquired patience you've been working on, I suppose, too.
It's an ongoing process. I'll tell you that.
So you have, I guess you're doing an offsite. You're bringing some people into town next week for this planning process, and I wanted to ask you a bit about how that's maybe evolved over the years. Because as companies grow bigger, maybe you get a little bit more compartmentalized in some aspects, but maybe you also flatten or need to keep things flat in a certain to a certain extent. And so, just curious, sort of what's going through your mind leading up to offsite next week.
Yeah, for sure. Well, first of all, one of my big things is making sure we have data and we can make data and factual based decisions. So, in preparation with that, I've been working with key members of our leadership team. So, we all sort of agree the baseline on where we sit. And if that baseline is financial, like what did we sell last year? Is there areas we made money? Are there areas we lost money? Things of that nature. If it's service delivery, hey, what's our responsiveness or how are we doing this? If it's newer technology challenges that are coming down the pipe, one of the big challenges we see for vCIOs, account managers, things like that, is the questions and the business items they're being asked to solve or our clients are coming to us with isn't, hey, the server won't like power on or something like that. It's we're looking to partner with an organization who has a very specific compliance requirement, and we need to make sure that this legacy database we have meets an encryption standard and connect with people in some other locations. A much more complex, multifaceted thing. Sometimes just business case. Sometimes there's various rules, jurisdictions, carrier requirements, what have you. And so, because we've got all those different things, and I use that as an example, the person who's going to solve that problem isn't somebody who was even like on the org chart or anything a couple years ago. It's somebody who we've got a certain definition of what that job description looks like right now. But when we move forward, we recognize that job description is going to change. Maybe it's only
Absolutely.
half a person, maybe it's 3 or 4 people.
Yeah.
AI is a really popular thing. We're working on adding a bunch of AI capacity internally, both process and also people with knowledge. I know a lot of my other peers in the MSP space as well. That's one of their biggest growth areas. So people are coming to everybody with the questions about it.
Yeah. You kind of dropped vCIO and account manager in the same sentence there. And there's been a bit of a firestorm on this on LinkedIn the last week or so, because we had a little conversation about it with Alex Farley and Kyle Christensen. And then Kyle posted about it. And I think the post was up to like 150 comments as of this morning. So clearly people don't have an opinion on this. But, as an 85 person shop, I wanted to ask you how you view a bit of that role. And, maybe the terminology is less important than sort of the function that people are doing and sort of how you're showing up for your clients in those two areas. So I'm curious to know what you're doing in those two departments with your clients.
Absolutely. So sounds like I've got some reading to do because I have not read the LinkedIn post and all the exciting comments. So I got to catch up on that. We're going to watch what I'm about to step into with my comments or whatever.
Type me in the
So,
comments is what we've
so
been saying. So go ahead, lay it down, and we'll let people come back and fight you on it.
sounds like a plan. So, I go back to the premise of like, why are we there in the first place, right? Like, why does an organization want to waste time, money, resources, and engage with us? And the answer is usually because they have a pain point they're looking to solve. And maybe that pain point is they need their team to be able to print and reset passwords. Maybe the pain point is some sort of complex compliance solution, or they're buying a new company or adding an organization or something else. And so we really look at it in the way that we have our particular basis. We have what we call client relationship managers. Sometimes people call them account managers. You got all sorts of other names for them. And they have a portfolio of clients. And our responsibility and their responsibility specifically is to make sure that they understand their clients' organizational needs because they might have clients in different types of organizations, different growth cycles, different sizes. And then make sure we're demonstrating, hey, what's the value we're bringing to the table? But also, what are the pain points or things they're looking to solve? And so the way we structure it is we want those client relationship managers to make sure they understand the business process.
Mm.
We don't expect them to be the technical person with the wrench and like going and fixing stuff and going and doing the plumbing and everything. But we want to make sure they're understanding that overall. And because of that, we get people who have a really high caliber, super sharp client relationship managers. And I think everybody on the team at this point, we are at least their second or third MSP. So they've all had like decade plus of experience. They know what's going on. Some of them have a deep technical background because they started their career in a technical space. Other folks have been in their MSP era, so to speak. They've only been in the client relationship management space. We got people from a wide variety of different backgrounds. But really, what our task across the board and what I view from that account management or client relationship manager perspective is we want to understand what's going on, reiterate the value we're providing, identify the pain points that our clients have, and then because we've got this big team of people, it's like they're going back and they're opening up the toolbox and saying, hey, this client has this type of pain point. Let me go ahead and help find the right tool, i.e., the right person on the team who has that knowledge, who we might come back. And maybe it's just some quick information. A lot of times what we find is that there's a project of some sort and there's significant extra either project or recurring services that the client needs. The client was going to source somewhere anyways. They had already planned on spending the money. And it's a service we need to remind them that we provide or set them up for success on. So that's how we sort of bifurcate the two components of it. The third component, I would say, is when you look at vCIO, there's really two bifurcating tracks of that. There's the vCIO who is very technically inclined, and we're looking at the technical sort of integration of all the different moving bells and whistles. And a lot of times our more senior technical folks are the person who does that. There's also the vCIO who is more of the C-level or administrative type of person, right? Like they're big on the budget. They want the fixed asset management. They want to be able to speak to the board with authority that here are the steps that we've done to mitigate the potential of ransomware, for instance. And so we have to recognize that those terms, like most terms in this industry, mean 10 different things to 10 different people.
Hmm. Indeed.
What out of curiosity, what's your take on it based on the LinkedIn process here?
I think I'll maybe try to summarize it in just talking about centricity. You know, is the process that you have deployed in this area customer centric or MSP centric? And I think it's maybe part of it is just the evolution that any particular MSP is going through, where you're trying to operationally mature your own business and try to get to a certain level of just being able to do the activities. And a lot of it stems from whether you started your business in a filling the white space type of approach, meaning maybe you were selling sort of a baseline plan to most customers coming through the door, and then you had to kind of expand your services over time. That's sort of an interesting challenge. It was Joe Burns from a MSP in the UK who was telling me about this concept of the white space, because I think it just articulated the idea so well. And so anyways, that's kind of where I sit on it, is really there's probably a point where it shifts into a customer-centric mindset. This is what at SkillPit we talked a lot about customer success in the last few weeks, and we'll probably get deeper into this topic as the year treks along. But that's kind of just it, is are you focused on the customer's success, or are we just trying to improve our own internal process at this point in time?
Gotcha. Okay, well, that's a good summary. Right on. Okay, that helps
Yeah,
me sort of
but
get up to speed
I'll
on
stay
that.
away from the terminology too, because I think somebody's going to come and slap me over the head for whatever I say, no matter what I
Well,
say.
for sure.
So
Yes.
I'll send you the link to the post. I think it's interesting
Yeah.
to see all the differing opinions, and it's interesting that I think once you have something working for you, you know, you could call it any number of things and it would probably just sound a little different, but it's kind of just in function of whatever you've been able to make work for your own company. I love the distinction that you make between the technical folks doing strategy and or the more business folks doing strategy. And this is maybe an area that is critical. The other thing that Alex Farling would say on this would be, if your VCIOs have a quota, then you should be sued. In a public company, a CIO that has a quota to bring in other vendors' products maybe would not be looked upon positively, right? So I think this is an area that maybe stems, the conversation stem from there to be like, well, how should we be thinking about this role if we are giving those people quotas to find
Yeah.
projects and find opportunities and this type of stuff? So
And I would wholeheartedly agree with that, right? Like, I mean, you got to be understanding where people are coming from. But like, if you part of our business is selling products and services. Like, it's not a secret. There's nothing else. That's just part of what we do in the various nature of that. And sometimes that's consulting time. Sometimes that's security products. Sometimes that's, physical servers, stuff in Azure, AWS, what have you. So you've got all those different things across the board. But those are all things where, once again, we talked about sort of we've got those account managers who are responsible for the business portfolio.
yeah.
Part of the business portfolio is coming to the table with the products and services that are appropriate for the client. Because once again, different clients have different levels of appropriate. That doesn't mean we go and sell every single client the exact same thing with zero regard for what their actual needs are.
Okay, so that's a
And so,
maturation in the process right there for sure. And I think the challenge is a lot of people have just tried to paint the whole thing with one big stroke of the same brush. And this is where some of the personalization of that role comes into play. And I'm glad to
sure,
hear that you're doing that or thinking about it. This is an area of struggle for sure.
absolutely.
Yeah. Um, so speaking of scale, and some of this conversation we had maybe last summer when we were talking a bit about, as a result of some of the acquisitions, even though you're a larger business, the maybe perception that some of your clients have is that, oh, well, there's, potentially another MSP down the street that seems to offer the same thing. And they don't understand the difference between, a high level of service and what seems like a basic level of service. And I'm curious if you've thought further about that and how you're addressing a bit of maybe just a perception and what value is and whether you can address it with the conversations that some of the strategic vCIOs in your business are having with customers.
Absolutely. So, what I would tell you to start with is we, like any other business, are responsible for delivering and communicating to our customers and our clients what value we are adding. And most often with our customers and clients, because they've got so many things going on, their primary job is not to sit and talk to their MSP all day, right? Because they've got so many things going on, it's really not what have you done for me? It's what have you done for me lately? How do you make sure we add value and identify that? And we, like every MSP, lose clients just as part of churn, right? And when we go and we look at churn, the vast majority of the time, the reason is that the client did not feel they were getting the value that they were looking for. And there's certainly cases where we look back at ourselves and we're like, yeah, we failed, we dropped the ball. Like that's on us completely, totally understood. And there's other ones where we look at it and we're like, we've done all this really good stuff, but we just did a crappy job on telling anybody about it.
Yeah.
And because of that, that's what one of the big differences. So I think value is a lot of times in making sure you understand the framework and pain points the client is looking for, and then delivering on that. If you think about utilities, right? Electricity. I live in the Seattle area, which had like this huge windstorm maybe a month and a half ago. And there were neighborhoods which didn't have power for days on end. Like, it was just ridiculous. I got a neighbor's house, tree fell through the roof. They're still busy trying to rebuild it and everything else. And I mean, we're months into this whole thing. So like the challenge you're seeing on the news about the wildfires right now. But you've got all those sort of things that happen. Electricity, people don't really care about a lot until it doesn't work.
Until
The
or
internet,
think
people
about it,
really
yeah.
don't care about until it
Yeah.
doesn't work. Like if it's power outage or it's whatever reason. So by the same token, if you're looking at those things, it's the sort of thing we need to make sure that we're continually demonstrating value. And so, if we think about one of the big things I'm sure a lot of people and MSPs just like us are looking at is adding things to a security stack. The threats that exist today are materially different than the threats that existed last week, last month, last year. Well, because of that, part of our responsibility isn't only putting the tools in place, but it's also we're making sure communicating to the customer, because it's not like they're going to pull up to their building and they're going to see like a 10-foot high brick fence with like searchlights on the top and dogs running around and everything else. Like, they're just going to be like, hey, my computer's a little slower, right? So how do we provide the context, set them up with success, and design it correctly for that reason?
So part of the reason I chose the title for today's session, the Goblins thing, is because when I went and perused your LinkedIn, there's a session or something that a post you'd made that sort of inferring those terms, and it was trying to communicate, I guess, to prospects or potential clients or clients, a bit of some of the challenges with the changing or evolving security landscape. And I'm curious, this is an area that I think most MSPs would agree that clients just don't get it. They think they're not a target, all the usual shenanigans. And I think when you think about scale in your business as you're trying to grow, I'm curious what areas you have found that have been successful in getting a security focused conversation across to the other side of the table. Seems to be a challenge across the board.
Yeah, so one of the first things I would tell you, which puts us in a very unique vantage point, is we have a fairly large incident response practice area. Which that means is that when organizations gets ransomware and they need to have stuff recovered, they call companies like ourselves. We work in conjunctions with different partners who might negotiate things, legal counsel, maybe the people are looking through all the forensics. And that group of people helps bring them back together, bring them back, makes them whole. But what that also means is that we have a ringside seat for just the amazing collateral damage which can happen because one thing happens. You look at the MGM hack last year where there's some social engineering. People got in there, shut all the stuff down. Caesars had a very similar issue that occurred, and they chose to pay the money and they made a business choice, right? They retained their operations, and MGM was sitting around for weeks, if not months on end, trying to get everything sort of cleaned up there. But I will tell you, it's one of those things sort of like if your house gets broken into, you go and buy an alarm the next day because you saw that information, saw that. And so part of when we go talk to people about security is we've got real world examples across the board of all sorts of goofy ways people got into systems.
Yeah.
And, most of the time it's because you really need sort of a belt and suspenders multi-tiered approach to set yourself up for success there. And I will tell you, in our experience at least, the biggest offenders are typically C-level people who feel security does not apply to them. And the unfortunate thing, which sometimes they don't realize, is they're the biggest target. They're the person who's like on LinkedIn. They're the person who's a public face company. They're the person who's involved in all sorts of various items. The amount of people at our company, as I'm sure at most, who have gotten an email from my new cell phone number where I immediately need them to go get thousands of dollars of Amex gift cards, MacBook Pros, whatever else, and then either text me at my new cell phone number that stuff or mail it to me at this new address I have in some random location is mind-boggling. And it's just people know that information. You can scrape and get anybody's cell phone number right quick. People can look on LinkedIn. You can figure out who the boss of the company is. Super easy to go and do that and figure out what's going on.
For whatever it's
And
worth,
so
man,
there's
if I got
yeah.
a text message from you asking for an Amex gift card, I would probably buy it for you.
You didn't mail me the ones that I asked for last week. That's weird. I
So
have this other cell phone over here. It's weird I didn't get any codes yet. So
indeed, I'll deliver them personally. Just just
nice.
down the block here for me.
Absolutely.
I'm always curious to know what people are kind of fascinated by at any point in time, and obviously having started as the guy who's running cable under the desks, and I think many of us have been there, done that. How do you think about your evolving interests in the business? What is an interesting fascination that you have right now, and how do you maybe force yourself to revisit what you need to be focused on or what you want to be thinking about in the business?
Yeah, I would tell you like I'm a person who taught myself the technical stuff, right? I like self-studied for whatever it was like an MCSE exam at that point, whatever it was called. This is ages ago. I'm probably dating myself for a lot of people on this webinar live stream at this point. Taught myself like on-prem exchange, got all those sorts of random things. And at that point, like the thing which was really enamoring to me was the technology. And the technology certainly scaled. And so that is still very interesting because I feel I've got a solid base that I understand what it is, I understand what the practical applications, but more so, especially as we've grown, especially as we've done some of this M&A activity, et cetera, all the nuances in the operation of a business at that level and all the ramifications and things we can drive that improve things and make things better for people across the board. Or there were ones where like, hey, that was a poor decision, Brian, and there was a huge amount of ramification you didn't realize.
Hmm.
And so I would say that's really the most interesting to me at this point is a lot of things about sort of the mechanics of the business operation and on the M&A, the mechanics of the M&A process and the integration, figuring out a deal that works for everybody, all those components.
Yeah. So when I met you, it was through peer groups, and I'm curious what role the peers in your peer group specifically kind of play in a bit of rounding out some of these practices and experiences. Because I feel like obviously in our space, the peer group ethos is actually quite important. I feel like the MSPs that grow the most are often surrounded by other folks that are, egging them on.
Absolutely. So the first peer group I joined period probably 14-ish years ago, something like that. And there are several people in that first meeting who are still very good friends of mine to this day. And it's been awesome to make lifelong friends and that sort of thing. And then there's a lot of other opportunities of people I've had a chance to meet. As things have developed, I've made a focus of having both IT centric peer groups. So people who are in the same industry, have the same challenges. We can benchmark financials. We can talk about strategy, talk about growth. And then also non IT centric ones that are maybe either geographically focused or focused on something else. So, as an example, I'm a member of EO or Entrepreneurs Organization. And so that's something where, just like a peer group, you have what's called a forum. Forum has about 10 people in it, typically, people from a bunch of different businesses. So, for example, in the one that I'm a part of, there's somebody who owns a structural engineering company. There's somebody who owns a series of restaurants. There's somebody in the financial services advisory space. And there's a lot of people in other industries. But there's a lot of things I've learned from it. And I made a comment earlier about how I'm an expert at making mistakes. And I would tell you that that's one of the great things is in a peer group. The number one thing is you can learn the mistakes from so many other people. And maybe you can shortcut your ability to having to make the same mistake. And you can learn so much data. And so when peer groups are the most influential, I think, is when there's a high level of trust and a high level of support and confidentiality within the group, because there's typically the stuff you want to share and the stuff that's really the biggest challenge is stuff that you probably want a smaller audience to be discussing.
Yeah.
I would say that's the big part, but I fully support peer groups across the board. I would encourage anybody to be part of one. I know if you go read like the R MSP Reddit thread, people post, various ones, which are more of just like an informal online meetup. Most industry conferences these days have some sort of roundtables, and I could probably name 5 or 6 different peer group organizations to anybody to go check out.
For sure. Yeah, there's a bunch of them for sure.
Yep, absolutely.
And consistently, I hear the MSPs that just swear by the relationships they have that have been built and forged within the peer group. That trust is so critical. Even the informal ones, I find are great. I think there is this very, very open ecosystem we have of sharing, and everybody talks about everything. When I describe the MSP industry to the people outside of the industry, it's always interesting that it comes up that I have to explain. For the vendors in the space, there's not many industries where every single one of your customers talks to every single other customer in the space. So this is something that's unique about MSPs, no doubt.
Absolutely. But I'll tell you the other interesting thing is we have had multiple instances this year, mostly with co-managed clients, where our point of discussion will come to us with something. It might be, hey, we'd like this technology or something implemented, or we'd like to renegotiate how our agreement structured because of some stuff. And when we ask some questions, it comes back to, hey, I joined a peer group, and in my particular industry, everybody else uses MSPs, but they use them in this way. And so we'd love to see if we could do that with you. And so the peer group thing, which used to be like just super like MSP centric, and I'd ask other businesses, and they'd all stare at me like, what on earth are you talking about? And now we're seeing a lot of other industries where it's picking up and it's a big thing.
And that's interesting, actually. Let me maybe double click on that for a sec. Have you made some of those changes to agreements
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
Because we're listening to the pain points of our customers, and then we're taking whatever that thing is, and we're saying, okay, who else fits that same mold? We have something new that we learned about, and we want to go then talk to a client and be say like, hey, there's changes in your industry. That's what we hear. Maybe something different is appropriate, and here's what's different and why. And maybe that's less revenue for us, but we're a better partner because we met them at the right place. Maybe that's more revenue for us.
Yeah.
Rising
Can you
tide
speak
lifts all
to
boats. So
Can you speak to any of those nuances? Because I find that interesting. Because a lot of us that come into this industry have this whole best practices mindset around
mhm.
running the business, and that often includes mooching off other people's managed services agreement templates or any template for that matter. Hashtag template. And so, how have some of those agreements changed that maybe was surprising to the way you've done business in the past?
Yeah, for sure. So we have historically operated in what I would call a traditional managed services model, right? Like we are here to provide a scope of services. We will deliver those services remotely, on site, monitor some items, deliver certain metrics, deliver certain KPIs. And as an example, we had a couple people who came to us and said, "Hey, I'd really love to have somebody on site full time,
Hmm.
but I don't want to hire somebody, right? Like our core competency is X or Y. So what we'd love to do is we'd love to have something where, yeah, that person's going to be there. And for us, it was a little bit of a change, right? Because there's some means and method where they're going to be asking for things that aren't in our typical wheelhouse. A lot of times it's sometimes like the lower level on-site administration about things. So for example, we have an industry that has a lot of people out in the field. And so there's like a couple hundred cell phones which are getting them. So there's some management of that sort of thing, for instance, something that wouldn't be a typical managed services for us. But we find out what that is, and we found out that, hey, that's the pain point or whatever. So we're now able to go talk to different people and say, hey, our traditional managed services model, maybe in this particular case, isn't the best fit for reason X or Y or Z.
Hmm. Yeah. Okay. I guess you got to be paying attention and be open to the possibility of that change or receptiveness to what their needs are. I do find it interesting. Sometimes those clients may come to you with those requests simply because somebody else is doing it and not necessarily understand the full reasoning or scope behind the request for the change. So it's part of the whole like lead with a best practice type of thing that doesn't necessarily fit in with the current business requirement or process necessarily.
And there's people who've come to us with a request or something, or we've asked them to change something based on a best practice type of thing based on our experience. And we've mutually decided for whatever reason, or maybe they've decided for us, or we've decided for them that our partnership is no longer a fit. And that's an okay thing. There's different seasons, different chapters in life. We're here to support people. But some people you're going to have as lifelong customers. Other people, they'll come in for a period of time, and at some point they'll roll on down the road.
Yeah. So, shifting a bit of the topic over to M&A, because I know this is a big area for you. Obviously, you've had a ton of growth through M&A in the last little while, and continues. You mentioned you had 3 deals in the pipeline, and so there's all these interesting things that always come out of M&A discussions. And I love how like glossing over the general conversations on these things are. And so hopefully I can maybe double click on a couple things. The cultural alignment was one area I wanted to ask you about. Um, I think it's so nuanced to just to say first of all, it's like, oh, we want to find the right cultural alignment, and it's one thing to say it, and another very different thing to actually go and execute on driving cultural alignment. So I'm curious what that means to you, and what are the specific actions or things that you guys do, or philosophy you take on a deal to ensure there is cultural alignment.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that I think I've taken away, right, is that we've had the opportunity to have some really successful and long MSPs have had a lot of longevity. But as part of that process, they typically have employees who have been there for a long time, and there's certainly a way of doing things or a consistent process. And suddenly rolling into work one day and saying, like, hey, the owners decided they're moving on to the next chapter, or they're stepping down some sort of role, and there's new process, new expectations, new things across the board there. That's really jarring for a lot of people. And so one of the first things is making sure we're understanding and setting good expectations for folks, right? Understanding what that roadmap looks
Mm,
like. And there's plenty of stuff we did during the first M&A deal, which we were like, oh, hey, we're not going to do that again. That was a mistake for some reason, for whatever the scenario is. And so we've learned, just like any project, you go ahead and move some VMs to Azure, right? The third time or fifth time around, you're going to probably have some processes dialed in, with the first time it was just a miracle the thing booted up successfully.
mm,
So I think that's one part of it. And then the other part is for us, I will tell you one of the things that sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes is a bum deal for me is I love connecting with people in person. And I think virtual connecting with people is great for this sort of event or some knowledge information shares, but really you don't get like the same level of conversation in most cases. And so, as part of the reason I love like in-person peer groups or in-person meetings, which you and I have a chance to connect at a lot of various industry events. But one of the challenges for our company is we don't have a single office where everybody is. We don't even have a single state, time zone, or country where everybody is. I've got people spread out all over the place. And so, how do we make sure we have people engaged and we have people continually communicating? So, we set some norms that are appropriate for our team overall. And sometimes for folks who are joining, the culture is a little different. That might change. So, for example, everybody lives on Teams all day. Our Teams has just got all sorts of stuff going on. But as part of that, every call that we have is a video call. So we want to like have the facial connection with somebody. And if we're going to take time and I'm going to ask somebody for some of their time, I need to be present in that conversation and I need to be engaged in that, right? So that's a really important thing across the board, and that builds some community. We also focus in our various regional offices on having activities that might be regional or department specific or something like that. And then once a year, we do have a fairly large holiday event. And so we'll fly the majority of folks and their significant other, whatever, to Seattle, have them come spend some time here because that's where the majority of the team at the moment are located. And we're excited to share that with folks. And so we're willing to make that investment because I do think that's a really important cultural part. And we're this year spending a lot of money on logistics, transportation, food, et cetera. That's for sure.
Yeah. Attached a bit to the cultural alignment, I think, is the client retention piece. And I can't tell you how many stories I hear of, an MSP was acquired and within a year or two, all the clients had kind of turned over. And I'm curious how you think about this client retention. What are some of the areas of maybe focus or priority in that scenario?
Yeah. So 2024 was a very tough year for us and for me in that way. And I'll tell you why. In the preceding, like pre-M&A, like 15, 16 years of business, I had like two clients who had declared bankruptcy and like one client who had some other sort of thing. We certainly had clients that left us on occasionally because we didn't do stuff right or pricing or whatever else, but it was few and far between. And last year, I think both two things: A, part of the economic headwinds; B, because some of the M&A stuff. We had a series of clients who there was either not a fit, and it was not a fit because they dropped off the face of the planet and left us hanging with a bill of some sort, or because they felt that we were providing the value or service. And so a great example of that is there's a customer which they were used to just always calling Billy. And Billy was like the guy no matter what. And Billy would go on site like 3 days a week. Well, Billy's also like a tier 3 engineer and was sitting around like resetting passwords. That's not fair to Billy to support his career associated with that. And so we made a change and we said, hey, we want to have Billy do stuff that's appropriate for his level of work, give him a roadmap, give him a career, everything else. And what we found is that the customer was like, that's cool, but that was really the important thing for us. And so there's things like that where there's a different expectation setting or different expectation management in that case.
Yeah. Had Billy sounded the alarm on that situation, or was he just kind of content to satisfy the client?
I think was looking at satisfying the client. We message a lot that we're here to satisfy the client, but we have to support the business operations in the background for that. And I think that's a prime example of his point of view. And I don't want to speak for somebody else. Is that, hey, I'm here trying to satisfy the client because that's what the client wants, and the client's still a client, so we must be satisfying the business stuff. So we should be all good. So, and it's a different stage and where people are. So that's how it goes. Absolutely, but it was a good learning thing. So we had several lessons, and it goes back to the adding value, right? Like the value for that customer was having somebody sitting there who could reset passwords at the first drop of a hat. And so we didn't articulate how we were going to give them that value in a different way. So that's on us.
Yeah. So what's your theme for 2025? I find that often people are negotiating in themes in sort of these big concrete ideas. What is your big 2025 theme?
So I don't have a name for the theme yet, but I'll tell you what conceptually it is, because we have new people joining us, either organic and direct hire, M&A activity in so many different ways. Really what we're focusing on is consistency across the board and making sure that we're empowering everybody with the tools to do that. Because the biggest thing we found is we have a couple companies we roll together. There's different ways people might have done something as simple as a computer deployment, right? And so we want to make sure that when somebody reaches out to our team, we deliver a consistent product and consistent results. And so if that's making sure we have more systems or different systems or very defined process where, hey, when there was 10 people, it was just a word of mouth tribal knowledge thing. And now we've got a very detailed document run book, something like that. It sounds super basic and it sounds like, why do you guys not already have that already dialed in? And what we determined is one of the ways we can like make sure we deliver that value for that quality of excellence, technical excellence, customer service excellence is making sure we're consistent what that process is across the board. And we've done that at a high level, but now we're getting down into the weeds, so to speak, to make sure we're executing that all the way through. And there's some areas there where we've been super successful and other areas where we got a lot of work to do in 2025.
Yeah, consistency, man. It's I think it's highly underrated as a flex. And you, my friend, are consistently insightful. Always love catching up with you. You always have something interesting, some interesting thing going on. Obviously, whether it's M&A or business process stuff, and I love that we're on the same time zone. This is always a challenge, believe it or not. So, but I appreciate you coming to hang out with me on MSP Confidential, my first guest of 2025. So inaugurating the year with a bang. And maybe I'll see you next week. Pop down to Seattle
Absolutely.
and hang
Yeah.
out.
Never know. That would be awesome. And definitely appreciate the invite. Certainly enjoyed it. For anybody watching this after the fact, you're welcome to find me on LinkedIn, reach out. Always here to answer questions, anything I can. So I always want to give them back. I've been super beneficial from a lot of things in this community, and I'd always love to help people where that's an option. But
I
I
love it.
definitely appreciate the invite. Would love to do it again. Definitely enjoyed it, and have a great rest of your day.
Absolutely, man. Well, thank you so much again for your time. Thanks everybody for joining us. This has been MSP Confidential. We're here every Friday at noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. This has been Brian Miller of FusionTek out of Seattle, but represented internationally now as a growing business. So great to have you once again, and we'll see everybody next week. Until then, take care, take it easy, and for the folks out in California, if you need some help from the MSP community or you want to reach out, by all means, I think this is one of the strengths of our community is that we help each other. If you need some coverage for your teams, I know a lot of MSPs are raising their hand and be like, let us know if we can help you deal with some of the stuff while you're addressing, having lost a home potentially or things like that. So don't hesitate to reach out. I think the MSP community is definitely jumping up and helping out. All right, until next week,